And we're good. Start recording. So we do have our final assignment for computer graphics, and it really boils down to this one page. So I'll just go ahead and read it out first. For this project, we will dive into the many components and user interface of the BIM modeling software Revit. The point of this project is to get familiar with BIM modeling software and to practice the required skills needed for the practical world in the architectural field. Consider yourself the client for this project. You will first start by selecting your topography site, and I've actually already loaded one for us. The studio itself will be comprised of a relatively simple design and will be noted for creativity for the project, but is not the focus of the rubric. Each project in whole should fit within a 50 by 50 foot or by 50 foot tall volume. Your studio will require the following: a living space of 800 to 1,200 square feet, studio space, kitchen, 2 bedrooms of this each, at least 1 bathroom, and some sort of display gallery or meditation area. I've kind of usually leave that one pretty open, but relatively speaking, build or design what you would want, right? And at least a fictitious spot on the lake. So each of your designs must be at least have 1 stair, and of course at least have more than 1 story, right? It'd be kind of lame to do, honestly, a 1-story project in Revit, not using it to its best abilities. However, some of the requirements, I do have some process requirements, and honestly, I would start that this weekend, if not today, right? Simply, it could be a sketch on trace paper, think plan, section, perspective, or just general ideas, but you want to have something, right? I mean, don't just try to jump right into a construction document program and start designing. It's not going to work out well. Who is? Oh, fair. PTSD. Anyway. But we do have some final requirements, and you'll notice it feels like a lot. And, well, as you'll see in Revit, you can produce drawings like a mad person. But essentially, there's a site plan that shows our first floor, second floor, 2 sections at least. Honestly, you can do as many as you want. All the elevations, so all 4, and at least 1 to 2 perspectives rendered, and yes, with a little bit of Photoshop. So those will be the final requirements. As you see, we're kind of only have 3 weeks for it. Arguably, you will have a majority of the final week to work on it as well. But keep in mind, most of our computers, to be honest with you, are not made for Revit. Right? Revit really is a desktop workstation program. Honestly, I'm getting away with a lot by recording and getting it done on a laptop, but it's not ideal. I wouldn't work, I don't work on Revit on my laptop. I work on it on my desktop at home. And the reason that is because most processors are multi-core, right? So they have 24 cores. They have, I don't know, some of them have like 72 logical cores now. Guess how many cores Revit uses? It uses 1. That's it. Why? Because Autodesk is cheap, right? They bought Revit from another company in the 90s, and they just slapped an Autodesk sticker on it. And unfortunately, they never rewrote the program to actually allow more cores. And when Revit came out, guess how many cores were in a processor? 1. Arguably, you had the Duo, but that had a lot of bugs. So it still uses 1 core. However, in 2025, guess which chips have the strongest single core? Apple. They have the strongest single core, which is why I get away with running an entire Revit program, because I have a strong processor, right? Now, as you'll see, at least in my tutorial, you'll see that it does struggle a little bit with obviously the graphical components, but not too much to at least be not working for this tutorial. However, as you'll see, it's mainly the introduction today, so I do want to explain the program as if it's the very first time you've ever seen it, how to open it, where to get the template file, and all of that. So let's just get right into it. So, and first, the template file is way at the top, and it is in our Google Drive. If you go ahead and open that up, of course it'll open the Google Drive, you'll click on Revit, and you'll actually see a few of them. So keep in mind, Revit is not a backwards compatible program. For instance, in Rhino, I can save a Rhino 6 and I can open it in Rhino 8. No big deal, and I can even save it back down to a Rhino 6 and go back to my Rhino 6 machine. doesn't work with Revit. As soon as you update the model, it is stuck in that Revit year. So for instance, if you're working, for today I'm working in Revit 2026. I believe our computers have Revit 2025. So are you going to download the Revit 2026 and work on the school computer? No, it won't work. In fact, it'll say, sorry, version's incompatible, right? So if you want to work on the 2025, you'll need to either get the 2023 or 2024. As soon as you open it, you'll see that it updates the model, and yes, it does take a little while to update the model. Again, nobody really knows why, probably that single core issue. But it'll update the model, and then when you save it, then it'll be stuck in whatever year you save it in. So again, there's actually a huge reason why some architecture firms, they still work in Revit 2018. Why? Because they're afraid to update the model and lose potentially, the ability to, of course, continue working on that model. They can't go back, right? As you'll see. Of course, I've already got mine loaded today in 2026. But just to break down the model and really to break down the interface, this is what is inside of the template file. And please don't start from just like a file new, right? It is not worth your time. You're gonna have to load a lot of stuff that you're just not familiar with, and I'm not trying to make this program any harder than it has to be. But it is a pretty dense program. And the way that it works is based off of BIM modeling software. Does anybody know what BIM stands for? Exactly, yeah, if you've taken Tech 1 or Tech 2, you definitely know that this is kind of the new concept, if you will, of the way that we build infrastructure. And what that means is now everybody's being taught BIM. The engineers, the plumbers, the electricians, the architects, the civil engineers, they're all being taught this BIM software. That way all of us, at least in a construction, couldn't actually all talk to each other. The architect immediately knows what the engineer just did to the model. The architect now knows immediately what the civil engineer did to the model because it'll update in real time. And that's really fruitful. That's really awesome because in the 90s it got whacked, right, in terms of accuracy. One wall was 12 feet and the engineer thought it was 13. Oh, crap. You get to the building field, the contractor built 14. Crap. We got a serious problem with the accuracy between communicating. So they started actually calling it parametric architecture, which is just a fancy word for everything is connected or has a certain connected value, right? And that is very true of this program. In fact, you'll see on this side there's something called families, and it essentially has every single component that can be singly found in this document. You'll notice it has all the vocabulary. It has the ducts, the duct system, the doors, the detail items, the curtain wall mulligans, the curtain systems, the curtain panels, and some of this may actually even be foreign to you if you've never taken Tech 1 or Tech 2. So keep in mind, Revit is for somebody who already understands architecture vocabulary, hence why it's not used in D1, D2, D3, D4, or honestly, even the first 4 years of your architecture schooling. Why? Because you don't focus on construction documents. It's something they don't tell you. You learn that actually at the firm. It's true, because every firm has their way that they put construction documents together, and it's actually kind of taboo to kind of share it with other places because the name of the game, at least in terms of architecture, is water not getting in. That's pretty much it, and fire code, right? If you can nail these two things as an architecture firm, the world is your oyster, right? And, well, good communication definitely helps with that situation, but I digress. To explain this model a little bit more, obviously we have certain windows, and you'll notice we have a bunch of tabs at the top, right? Of course, one being labeled architecture, you got structure, steel, precast, systems, insert, annotate, analyze, massing and order, collaborate, view, manage, add-ins, and modify. To be honest, we'll use just about all of them, at least bits and pieces of each of those tabs. But very often the first thing when you're looking for something is, uh-oh, the command bar is gone. I can't just type in what? I can't just type in line. I can't just type in wall, or can I? In fact, you'll notice on our Miro page, and there should be, whoa, don't get that guy. You'll see this wonderful Revit keyboard shortcuts and hotkeys, right? You'll notice they're very different in Revit. In fact, the way that you input commands is simply 2 letters. However, some of these letters are really honestly kind of weird, like LO for heating and cooling loads. Okay, LO for loads, LD for loads. Wait, I'm already confused, right? So don't get me wrong. Eventually, you do memorize these, especially when you're at a firm and things like that. But again, I wanted to put it there just because they're kind of set in standard too. And you can manipulate and change them, but often people and firms don't. To be completely honest with you, though, you guys are all going to start looking for an architectural job, hopefully within the next 2-3 years. And honestly, one of the first questions they're going to ask you, how do you feel about Revit? How do you feel about AutoCAD, right? To be fair, when they say AutoCAD, that's honestly the same thing as Rhinoceros. In fact, I would say somebody who knows Rhinoceros is better than somebody who knows just CAD. And arguably, they're almost interchangeable. So when they ask you, do you have any CAD experience? You say absolutely. In fact, it's one of my fortes, right? Especially if you were taught that in high school even as well. However, they're going to ask you maybe, do you have any BIM modeling experience or do you have any Revit experience, right? Those are really honestly the same question, right? You should say, yes, I am comfortable after my computer graphics class at San Antonio College, right? And to be fair, in your master's program at usually any architecture school, they have a Revit class, right? But again, keep in mind, it's not until your master's class, right? Again, those first 4 years, it's very rare that they teach you Revit, right? Now, don't get me wrong, some studio professors very rarely expect Revit, right? Whereas a majority of architecture school, they'll expect either some sort of CAD and Illustrator and like Adobe Suite, like what we've been doing, and Rhinoceros, right? Really, there's a huge debate between these two programs, and it really depends which professor you're taking. In fact, it might be something you ask when you go to the next school. Hey, studio professor, I would like to join your studio class. What digital programs do you prefer? And that should give you a really good answer. In fact, they might even say, I don't mind Rhinoceros or Revit. And that's a star professor, right, to say the very least. But in our case, to explain most of this program, you'll see that there's an architecture tab. And well, that's because we have Autodesk Revit 2016 or 2026. And you'll notice when you're installing this program, if you want to install it on your personal computer, there's many different Revits. In fact, there's Revit Civil Engineering, Revit, all the different field types, MEP, steelwork, structural engineer. There's all the different classes. Honestly, the same program, but their little tab doesn't say architecture. It now says structure, right, and other things. You'll notice in the architecture program, it kind of has a little bit of everybody's. Again, because we do mess with a little bit of everybody's part in the design. But just to explain the UI, obviously we have our tabs at the top. We have what is known as the project browser, right? And usually I defaulted to this side. And you'll see it has quite a bit. It has every single floor plan, the ceiling plans, the 3D views, the legends, the schedules, stuff that you are honestly probably foreign to because we don't even get into that until you build the building, right? Guess what we never do in the first 4 years of architecture? Build a building. Guess what you might do actually in your master's? Build a building. In fact, one of the studio classes at Texas Tech, the whole studio is in charge of making a pavilion. It's really awesome. It's a great class. It's a long 16 weeks, but they make construction documents. They get with the contractor. They get the budget. And then honestly, they have like a budget of like usually about 30 grand to essentially build a pavilion. It's a lot of fun and teaches you, of course, a lot. And I'm sure UTSA and other architecture programs have that as well. But it is pretty rare that you really dive into Revit unless you're just absolutely focused in getting into the real practical world of architecture. However, you'll see that I've made some things for you, such as the sheets and the title blocks. Yeah, again, you don't need to make the title block. It gets even worse. You double click on the title block and it's a separate family, right? So you can make your own. And in fact, you can even start to put your own logo here. So for instance, I'll do TX for text. I'll make something that says CCV, right? In my case, Christopher Charles Verrett, right? I'll load this into my project and overwrite that file. And all of a sudden, you get the CCV. But what's nice about that is, well, if I click on any other sheet, it loaded that as well. So I no longer have to label every sheet. Those sheets are now connected in their own family, right? Not to explain this too hard, and of course you can double click on your middle button of your mouse in order to always zoom in. I really wish Rhinoceros had that feature by default. You can actually set it to do that, by the way. You'll also notice that the buttons of your mouse are a little different, right? The way that we spin around in a model is no longer our right click button. In fact, you'll notice it doesn't do anything. You can set it to do that, but it's a pain. In our case, we have this wonderful three-dimensional box, right? Which you'll notice you can kind of click and drag it, right? Not too badly. Another thing that's kind of nice is you can click on that piece of the box and it's gonna set it to that view. So again, it's not 4 viewports now, it's just kind of one view box, if you will. I know it probably has a special name, but again, we can get the elevation, and the axonometric as well, or isometric, my bad. But in our case, yeah, you can also move it around by holding shift and using your middle button key. So that's definitely a game changer. And what's nice is when not holding shift and I just use the middle button, I can pan. So honestly, once you get really used to this, it's arguably better than Rhinoceros. But I digress, because it really is preference. However, that would be the project browser. And I don't want to explain too much of these and scare you away, but yeah, essentially everything is loaded into the project and then picked out like a catalog. So even though, and as you'll see, you'll load one door, but it has like 18 different doors of the manufacturer. That's great because I might use one of those doors, and it's really great for the manufacturer to know which door exactly that you're ordering. In fact, eventually once I finish a building, I can select the whole building. I can click on quantities and I can see exactly how many doors I need to order, which is a huge plus for a contractor and getting a building built. However, not exactly imperative of a design studio. Have you ever been asked how many doors you have? Yeah, me neither, right? And no, I'll never ask that question in a design critique because it's not important. However, is it important to the contractor and the cost of a building? Heck yeah. But what is that called? The scheduling, right? And yes, honestly, one of the first jobs you'll have as an intern or your first starting position at a firm is usually checking all of this stuff to make sure it's correct. So again, you get very familiar with all the different parts of the project. Again, as you can see, it takes a lot of explaining of the practical architectural world and why I would even teach you this program to begin with. To be fair, some professors say I shouldn't be at all, right? I should have just continued with 3D printing or continue in some of these things. But again, I think if you've been going to the alumni talks and you're interested in working instead of at Carl's Jr. like I was, I wanted to get in the door as soon as possible. I was so tired of flipping burgers, right? And working odd jobs. But in our case, we do have our next thing, the properties panel. And this one is kind of weird. As soon as you click on something, you'll notice that it changes its properties. In fact, very different options based on actually what you've clicked on, which is great. Honestly, Rhinoceros kind of works that way, but generally kind of has the same options, just grayed out. This one will altogether just completely go away or still gray out stuff you can't change. So arguably not exactly organized, but you'll see as soon as you click on the extra white space or the viewport, you'll notice that it has viewport settings. So again, it's very cognizant, if you will, of what you're clicked on or what you've selected. For instance, if I have 2 categories selected, such as my import and another object, you'll notice it really only has stuff that matches. And unfortunately, there's nothing that matches in parameters between those 2 families. And that's okay. But it definitely should tell you something quite immediately what's wrong with what's going on. However, I've loaded one for us, but just to show you how I did this, I'm going to go ahead and delete it for now. So in my case, you'll notice I've imported my DWG, and the way that I did that is I went to Insert, and I basically just linked a DWG. In my case, I linked a CAD file, and yes, a DWG can retain its 3-dimensional information. How many of you guys know how to do that in Rhino? Yeah, you know how to draw lines or trace it and lift them up. Once you're done with that, save it as a DWG or export it and open it in Revit. In fact, you can do this with a lot of shapes, and we do. In fact, there's an entire plugin now for Revit with Rhinoceros. Rhinoceros is an open source, whereas Revit's closed source. mostly. It's kind of a half and half situation. But in our case, they do and they are starting to work together, right? So be on the lookout. I might add that to our tutorial. I don't know if it would just scare us completely. But as you see, a little bit differently, as soon as I click on this, it clicks on the entire element of the import, right? In fact, you can see some of my trees that I put down, and my topography lines are there, right? However, if I double click on it, literally nothing happens because it's an import, right? There's nothing about it. However, you'll notice some of my tabs change, especially in the modify. Again, always be cognizant of your tabs. In fact, it'll even make a new one called modify my topo lines. So that's great because, well, let's check it out. A query means the information. So if I click on that and I click on this line, it'll tell me exactly about it. It's a line, it's a topo line layer, and that's about it. That's all it can tell me. I can decide to hide it or delete it, and I definitely don't want either of those. So in my case, the first thing that I want to do is go and escape. You'll notice you get out of a command by the escape button, and we're going to turn this into a surface, almost like magic. So I'm going to go to my masking and site. I'm going to go to my topo soil. That checks out. I'm going to click on it, and you'll notice it immediately goes to this box. Well, that's not exactly what I wanted. In fact, this is if I was drawing it myself, which, by the way, is not an easy task in Revit, just drawing or mass modeling. To be fair, I find it a lot easier to make something in Rhino and actually transfer it right into Revit if I'm doing something actually that I can't figure out in Revit. So I'm going to exit that one, and I'm going to click on this little bottom arrow, and actually I want to create from an import. Sweet, because I have an import. In my case, it's going to go, okay, well, what's the import you're talking about, Chris? Well, it's going to ask for that CAD import, and in my case, create from CAD. Once I have that, it's going to accept that this is a CAD DWG model. As soon as I click it, it's going to go, hey, what lines do you want to turn into a model? Well, in my case, I don't want my trees to turn into a surface, or my setback, or my zero layer, so I just need my topo lines. I'll click OK, and voila, I have a surface, arguably better than even the loft ability in Rhinoceros. However, you'll also see that it kind of messed up in certain locations too, right? So even though that's kind of set in stone, it's not, right? I can also now click on this topo surface, and you'll see something called modify sub-elements. Again, if this is starting to sound really confusing, there's a reason why I record this, so you can pause and of course write some of these down, right? Because the hardest thing about this is I can't just type it in. I really have to go and look for that icon. Now, for me, this is about my 10th year in Revit. Arguably, if I count my high school, it's like getting into the 19th year. Anyway, one of the first programs I learned in high school was actually Revit, and I won actually my TSA award. I got first place for putting Villa Savoye by Le Corbusier in Revit, right? However, it was also not owned by Autodesk at that point. It was a very different program. If I find that file, I'll go ahead and show it, but I've been looking for it for a while. But in that case, I can click on this and modify sub-elements. When I do that, you'll see that it's actually generated from a series of points from those lines. So, I mean, don't get me wrong, I just need to select that point, and you'll notice a little arrow pops up, and we can basically scoot it down. Yeah, you can essentially do this manually, but if you had 1,000 points, you don't get caught by your boss moving 1,000 points. Why? Because they don't want to see that they're paying you $55 an hour to move points around, right? They like to see the first one where you're like, wow, you use Rhino and Revit to finish the job in 30 seconds? You're getting a raise, right? But again, I can't tell you how many times I've busted even people that worked for me at one point, or myself when I was a student, sitting there doing something that took an hour. I was getting paid for that hour, and it should have taken 30 seconds. So again, eventually, especially at a firm, guys, just get up, go ask a question to somebody. Don't be afraid, and be like, hey, can you show me how to do this in Revit? It's not a big deal. In fact, they'll probably laugh and go, dude, that totally stumped me too. Watch this, right? And I can't tell you how many times I've learned some of the greatest tricks of Revit just by asking a question, right? But in this case, you'll see that's definitely way better there, and I do need to lift this point up as well. You'll see that we get these little arrows, which by the way don't scale, and it's very annoying for somebody like me who can't see very well. But very often when you click on something, it's actually highlighted as blue in Revit. And you can change that, but just by default, you'll see that we get these new things when you click on something. So always be on the lookout for what is changing when you click on something. I mean, that would be the best advice I can give towards Revit. But in this case, as you can see, arguably faster than Rhino, right? In a way, right? In a sense. Don't get me wrong, I've already given you a lot there, and you can't just double click on it. In fact, if I double click on it, you'll notice it does something else, a different edit mode, in fact. So just to exit that real quick, if you want to modify the elements, modify sub-elements. If I actually want to modify the shape of this, so for instance, you may notice at the top, here's like, Verret, you're kind of missing a triangle there. You're right. If I double click on that, because it basically defaulted, I'm going to go ahead and not remove these two lines. I mean, don't get me wrong, watch this. If I remove these two lines and I try to accept it, it's going to go, hey, hold on, buddy. You've actually got these disconnected points. So Revit is trying to help you, and the emphasis is trying. It's arguably sometimes not helping you, right? Sometimes it'll literally say, I don't know, right? And in fact, you'll click on show me. Hey, show me the error here. And it literally goes, hey, I can't show you. So you close it and it goes back to a default, right? So again, even though it's noticeably on the screen, Revit's not extremely smart. It doesn't always know exactly what's wrong. And I'll just put that as a caveat. However, as soon as I finish and I just say, I can either quit sketching, which is hilarious. It gives you like a bailout option, like just go for broke, or just continue, right? Just continue, right? And obviously draw that line in. So I'll use my line tool. And of course, you'll see that it uses OSnap by default. By the way, you can't turn that off. It's kind of great. You'll hit enter and complete the box. Once you're finished, you'll hit the check mark. It'll give you an error going, hey, I still see an error, but you're like, I don't care. Especially if it's a yellow note error, don't even worry about it. I don't even read them. Anyway, you can if you want to, but as you can see, we can fix our little situation here, right? Moving on, you'll notice the way that something works, especially in Revit, and I'll go ahead and stop scaring you with all the different families that are there. But maybe one of the first things I want to do is actually set up my site plan. So if I click on my site plan, you'll notice there's nothing there by default. But over here, I have made a view for you called Site. You'll notice that these are essentially separate viewports, right? So if I double click on this, you'll see that it brings up a new tab, and it's different from the site plan, right? You'll notice that I can't just drag this also onto a plan. Not there anyway. So in my case, I'll drag my viewport onto my sheet. Once I do that, you'll see that it actually automatically goes to scale. This is the part that I think students love the most, is that yes, you can double click on the viewport. You'll see that you can change the scale on the click of a button. So right now it's at 1/8 scale on a 24 by 36 paper. Again, so many things kind of already done for us, and for good reason. We don't want to pay $55 an hour for somebody to be making a title block over and over again. Wild that we even used to in the 90s with AutoCAD, and we did, and I was there. And we made the title block. I mean, don't get me wrong, some of us got smart and go, hey, we can just copy this and then change the information, copy this, change it. But, you know, it takes some time. However, yes, you can click on the scale and go, no, I want that at 1/4. Wham! Right? No, actually, I want that at, I don't know, 1 to 50. Bam! Right? And it is extremely useful, right? That being said, 1 to 50 is pretty small. So for today, I think I'll go with like 1 to 20. And that should be okay. You'll see that I double clicked on the outside of the viewport in order to actually move it around. Again, I do not know who is writing this program, but you'll notice that I have a little title header. And that's really cool for a construction document. Otherwise, you don't really know what those are. But very often they have the scale, they have the graphic scale, and sometimes even the north arrow on them. However, you'll notice to move it, you just click on it and move it. That's great. How do I move this line? Dang it, Revit. The weirdest thing, you have to click on the viewport, you get the button, also impossible to see by the way, and you move it. And yes, I did not write this program, but it has a very odd chain of commands when it comes to doing certain things, arguably moving this viewport title. In our case, I actually loaded some viewport titles for you, which by the way, yeah, you have to make them in Revit, which by the way, if you work for a firm, they usually have all these for you. So I'm kind of treating you like the first day of the firm, right? They are going to have a template for you. They are going to have their new build templates. They are going to have, honestly, they'll probably throw you right into a project that's already being worked on. It's already going to have a lot of stuff loaded. However, to teach you this program and the way that it works, there's just some things that I have to explain. In my case, let's open that up a little bit. Get there. There we go. That way you can see a little bit more options. But relatively speaking, again, as soon as you click on something, even like a viewport has a bunch of different properties. Even the viewport title has different properties, and we can actually choose different ones. I gave you a titleless, like so if you don't want a title there. And if the default is actually like super small, so I made one that's just a little bit bigger so that you can see it a little bit better. Anyway, the minute things I do for you guys. But that way you don't sit there and struggle for 6 hours and be like, how do I change this, sir? Anyway, funny enough, students usually just go to the annotate and they make a new text box and they'll just like cover it. You know what I mean? Like, don't get me wrong, there's a way to fake it in Revit too, but it's not exactly the way that you want to do it. However, we've gone over a couple of things, and I know we're getting into the 10th hour, so I want to start drawing my design, right? To be fair, please don't do what I'm doing. Obviously, sketch your drawing first. Don't just wing it. You don't have much experience in Revit, and even if you do, it's still helpful to design it first, right? So in my case, I'm going to start with my floor plan, and you'll notice, hey, wait a minute, that's not the same amount of area, right? In fact, I have a viewport boundary involved by default. I did that on purpose to you guys so that, well, you at least know where to find it too. In my case, I need to expand my viewport. It's almost can be treated like a crop tool, right? I can also make it disappear, right? You'll see that it's on by default, but to control it, it is called your show crop tool, right? So in my case, I do want that. That way, of course, I can figure out where to put my building. And in my case, I'm going to go with probably towards the middle. And by default, as you can see, this can take some time. What is nice about it though is I can double click on it and actually control it as well. So if I did want something really funky and I was trying to do something for studio like that, I can use TR for trim. And I can click these two. I click on the two that I want to keep. And I can trim very differently in Revit. Don't worry, I'll go over that again. But if I did want to do something really crazy and I had this awesome building and I was trying to get some other diagrams in here, especially for my final artboard, let's face it, that's arguably really cool and very easy. But in our case for studio today, I'm just going to go with a regular rectangle. So I'm going to delete that and just more or less kind of make a regular rectangle. And I kind of want to put my building probably about right there, so arguably I'm going to go with that and checkbox it. So not a big deal. As you can see, I have some leftover stuff from previous classes, so I'll just delete that. And I have this like leftover view in there, which by the way are all parametric. So let's make a wall. Well, how do we make a wall? There is a command for it, right? It's called WA. But in our case, you can also go to the architecture tab, and it's one of the first tools, a wall. However, Revit works as if you were building it for real. Do you build walls first, or do you build a foundation? Absolutely. So when in doubt, honestly use your context clues and use honestly your critical thinking skills on this one, that Revit wants you to build it or design it or model it as if you were building it in real life. If you don't know how to do that, how are you supposed to work in Revit? Again, another reason why we don't introduce Revit in the first few years. But let's at least fake it till we make it and start off with some sort of floor, right? So let's definitely choose floor. And yes, I gave you some pre-made floors as well. Countertop, because that is honestly how I make countertops. I fool it. I make floors. Anyway, I have a generic 18-inch and a generic 24-inch. Since it's the bottom foundation, I'm going to go with 24 and more or less start to draw something. Now by default, it's really more like a polygonal lasso tool, right? And it's going to kind of continue what I'm drawing. You'll notice it even dimensions it even angles it. Really a lot of parametric information going on there. So in my case, I'm going to fake it till I make it. I'm going to go with 12. And to be honest, you could focus on the numbers or you can just kind of ballpark it. Let's say my sketch was kind of like this or something. Again, I always get fancy with the spices and regret it later, especially for this tutorial. like that. Obviously, I don't want to do something so crazy that I can't even solve it myself. But another thing that can be said, I can show you a couple tools. So the first one is DI for dimension. If I do DI and I click on two pieces, I can dimension something. And that is super helpful. You can multiply dimension something. And yeah, if you're making a construction document, holy cow. I mean, it's a game changer, to say the very least. However, you'll notice these dimensions are only in my edit mode, right? So, I mean, that's definitely something to be cognizant of, because as soon as I hit the check mark, well, those are actually going to go away, right? In fact, yeah, there's those dimensions. Now, it won't change, but I'll actually have to put more dimensions. So, again, DI again. However, that's looking super funky, and I can't just move it, right? I can't just change it. So I'm going to edit, undo that. I'm going to double click so that I can edit it. However, the other way to double click it is clicking on the item itself and going to modify sub elements or edit boundary. In my case, modifying sub elements kind of does what it did in the topography. If I wanted to make like a really chaotic, like bending floor, I could, but I would do that in the modify elements. To be honest, we don't want you to do that necessarily. But funny enough, it even gives you like a little preview of these things, right? Which is really helpful, honestly, especially when you're learning these programs for the first time. I honestly wish Rhino could get on something like that. But what is nice is, of course, you can click on it and change it. The second tool that I really love is the Align tool, and I was thinking of Brandon on this one because he was like, is there any Align tool for Rhinoceros? Yeah, but it sucks, right? In Revit, it is way cooler. I'll type in AL for Align, and it's going to say, hey, what do you want to align to? And I'm going to go, hey, I want to align to this. Hey, what do you want to align? This. Awesome. And that is quite the game changer. However, once it's aligned, I can then move it again too, just in case I wanted a difference. Another thing that is really cool is once you click on something, you'll notice it has these kind of faux dimensions as well. If I click on that and I type in 18 feet, it's going to immediately make an 18 foot. So again, it's not command-based anymore, it's parametric. It's there and it's always editable, right? Whereas in Rhino, not necessarily the case. I mean, you can edit it, but you're actually switching geometries. You're changing the geometry itself. In our case, it's just a really long code. Again, not to dive into it too much. But let's say that is what I wanted to end with. You know what? I'm going to stick with the diagonal, but I'm going to give myself a 45-degree angle. So maybe I want to change that. Again, I'm going to hold Shift just like any other program and add to my selection, right? Oh, my bad. It is not Shift. It is Control in Revit. Or, oh my God, what is Control in Windows?
Control is Windows.
It is Windows?
Option.
Okay. Option. No, it's my control button as well. Maybe they have the same control. It's the control button. Honestly, I'd mess with the keys a little bit. It is going to be a little different. You actually use Shift to minus in Revit, which is super freaking confusing. But yeah, to add, you're going to hold Control, and then it's going to bring up this point, and you can actually move it as well. So that is pretty nice. Now, what's really awesome is once I make a floor, if I want to make some walls, I can either click the Wall tab or WA for wall. As soon as I hit WA, it brings up the wall. And it is kind of weird because if you just hit W, it doesn't do anything. But then as soon as I hit A, it goes into wall. So it is kind of nice. There's no like timing base to it or anything like that. But very often I'm typing something and I'll accidentally hit like a command in Revit. So I mean, be careful with that. But what's really nice about drawing walls is as soon as I start clicking, bam, like it is producing the wall and it is ready to go. I mean, I can make something real funky, right, to say the very least. However, what's really nice about that is as soon as I do, it's already made a digital model. Like it's literally made the plan view, the section view, the elevation view. It's making all of them at the exact same time because they're based on the same parametric instance, right? However, let's go back to floor plan. And you'll see it saves those tabs now up there too. And that's definitely not what I want to do, right? That's a weird, funky building. So in my case, I'm just going to edit undo. Another way that we can make some walls is you'll see this pick line tool. Now that's one of my favorites. I pick this line and I can control some things at the top. So for instance, how tall the wall is or what's it connected to. That actually brings up some good detail. I might actually want some of my elevations or a section so that I can start piecing this together myself. In fact, I'll go to view, and voila, right? Hey, there's a section view, there's a 3D view. And don't worry, we'll get into all of these, but let's first get some elevations and sections. In my case, I'm going to click section. Bam! I just made a section. Lo and behold, I double click on it, I made a section. That's how awesome Revit is. And I get it. A lot of us like, oh my gosh, I could totally use that in Studio. You don't realize how long I've wasted, of course, making sections and floor plans. But again, there's a reason, because you were building that strength in your mind and orthographic view projection alone. A lot of that came from the drafting table when you actually had to think about it. Don't get me wrong, this actually makes worse students, arguably, which is why we refrained from teaching Revit in the first 2 years. But it is definitely useful and definitely practical. I can save a lot of time, and if I can save a lot of time, I save a lot of what? Money. So as you can imagine, American culture just really jumped on Revit. However, let's make some walls now that we at least have a section. And my bad, let's get some elevations in there. And you'll see by default, it actually kind of helps you, right? Pick the right view. And sometimes you got to get a little bit closer to the model, and it's okay if it doesn't work sometimes. You'll see that it's trying, right? But if it accidentally faces the other way, it's okay. Because if you click on it, you can check that box and uncheck that one. It's going to go, whoa, bro, are you sure you want to delete that? Yes, please do. Because when I double click on this one, bam, elevation view. Now, again, I don't have anything there, so there's nothing to see. But as you can see, as soon as I draw something, immediately the elevation view changes. As soon as I draw something, immediately the section view changes. But man, right from the get-go, it's like, it's already computer graphics for me. I didn't have to make any of those things. They're already components. And in fact, as soon as you click on this, you'll see that I've loaded some for you. Yeah, not many, only 2. So that was, of course, not to confuse you. But again, as soon as you make this, you'll notice that you've actually made a view. Right? You've made a viewport every time we make these. So if I delete one, it's going to go, are you sure you want to delete that? Because it just deleted it from my elevation view. They're all connected, and that's exactly what we mean by parametric architecture. Now I have about 15 minutes left, so I do want to get into the thick of it. So let's go ahead and make some walls, my favorite way, picking some walls. And wow, just look how easy that is. I just actually, because again, I don't have to dimension anything now. And that's good. I'm good to go. Oh man, I picked the wrong wall. What do I do? Well, select all the walls, or select everything, right? And then filter it to only select walls. And then change that wall. Oh, I don't know. I want brick on stud. Bam. Oh, I don't know. I want glass walls. Okay. I don't know. I want a curtain wall. Well, that one's probably going to freak out, but it works, right? So, I mean, don't get me wrong. As you can see, it's much faster than AutoCAD. I don't have to sit there and draw all the mullions anymore. I don't have to sit there and draw all the thicknesses or different materials. Now it's a little bit different. Now I have to know a little bit about what's in that wall. I have to know what's in that window. How big a mullion? What the hell is a mullion? Those kinds of questions. So don't get me wrong. If you find that this program's teaching you architecture, you might not be ready for Revit, right? But at the same time, arguably, that's why I use AI. I can't tell you how many things I've learned from just using AI that in actually using it has taught me a lot of things. So don't get me wrong, you can be autodidactic as well, which means the ability to teach yourself, which if you're going to college, you may have realized already, that is a majority of what you do in college is, of course, teach it to yourself. But of course, you come for the resources. But in our case, if we double click on the section, bam, already done. So again, I know it's very fruitful and very what's the word, persuading, right? It's evocative, right? It looks like magic. But in our case, it can be detrimental. As you can see, as soon as I want to change something, it does start to be a little bit more difficult. It is one of those programs where it thinks you're building the final design. So it's not really great for trying to change or trying to manipulate it. Honestly, you can come up with a building and show it to your professor and they'll be like, I hate it, change it. And you're like, crap, how am I going to change this in Revit? honestly, there's this thing called design options in Revit, and to be fair, it's made for practical uses. I won't even get to it, honestly, in this project. But if I do want to change it, I'll select the walls again. And again, I'll switch it from curtain wall to, my case, just a typical exterior wall. So honestly, I accidentally gave you two. Let's go with CMU on stud. Yeah, definitely not bad. So from here, now I maybe want to make some interior walls. And yes, by the way, Revit will constantly ask you to save, which is fine. But in my case, I can click on another wall. And what's great is it'll immediately connect to that wall. Right, just like that. And you'll see by default, these aren't getting post-shade. What's going on? Well, if you click on that wall, you'll see that it has some certain parameters, whereas maybe the other ones, well, no, they're at 20 feet as well. It actually just might be the wall type that I've used. So for instance, again, changing something in Revit is difficult. I don't want to scare you in the first one. Let's just use a typical wall so that we don't have to get crazy. Don't worry, we'll get crazy later, but let's at least get started. And of course, this is after all of that sketching and design work that you'll be doing. So in my case, let's just use a regular wall. And as you can see, it post-shades automatically and connects it for us. So again, what's really nice is I can move that wall and it's very parametric. I can even align that wall and things are connected to each other, which brings me to my next point. Everything in Revit is essentially connected to another thing. The window that you place is connected to the wall. If I delete the wall, it deletes the window, right? The window doesn't just magically stay there like a Revit project would be where everything is completely isolated. The next thing to be said is if I draw on a wall or I move that wall, it's going to think that they're supposed to be connected. And that's not always necessarily the case. So in my case, I might want to use AL for align, and I may want to align to a certain wall. In fact, you may notice it's trying to automatically tell us, hey, which line do you want to align to? In my case, I want this stud piece. So I might need to hit tab and select that piece. Yes, it is difficult, and you do get better at this, by the way. But you can align things perfectly, right? Again, you can fake it till you make it as well. But in a sense, you'll also click, and we don't need 20-foot walls, let me tell you. So in my case, I do have a couple of things here, right? So always select fine. That way, of course, you can kind of see what you're looking at. And take it off of hidden line, wireframe, and put it on hidden line, right? Usually you should see a surface. In my case, doesn't look like the case. Let's find out why. Let's go with shaded. There it is. And we'll go to a shaded view, and clearly now you can see that these walls are way too tall. Now, to be fair, we can select all of them, and we can go, well, those are 10 feet walls. We'll click it, and it'll immediately, boop, all the way to 10 feet, right? Which is great, but I may actually want to do that a little bit easier. And in fact, I may need to go to my section, so let's go to sections, double click, and we'll open that section tab. In fact, you'll see that I gave you some floors to automatically do this as well. But if I wanted to add another floor, oh wait, I forgot I added a lot of floors for you guys. You don't really need to add another floor, I guess, but in my case, if you want to, you'd have to go back to the architecture tab and go to your grids and levels. As soon as I click level though, keep in mind that yes, I've done this about 15 times, so there's like a level 15 in there. But as soon as I make that level, it should actually make another level available. So if I go to view and I go to plan views and I go new floor plan, it's going to go, hey, you mean level 15? Why, yes, I do have one of those levels. Again, not to get into the minutia of this program, but as you can see, it works a lot differently than most programs you're familiar with. You'll also notice that if these walls are connected, so you'll notice if I take a wall, I can actually top constraint connect it to something. Well, in my case, I'll connect it to floor number 2. That's great. It's going to go directly to floor 2. And what's awesome is if I move floor 2, the wall's going to stick with it. But those walls I didn't connect did not. All right. So again, one of the good practices you can do is to constantly connect your parts to other parts. So in my case, selecting that, and again, very parametric. As soon as I move that level, it moves the wall, right? again, I know I've probably scared you enough, so I will probably leave it here for today. However, keep in mind that you do want to sketch these things first. And it wouldn't be a bad idea to even put that on Miro first. That way we can at least talk about it, and that way you have a general idea of what you want to shape and what you want to do. But at least for part 1 today, and like I said, there is 3 parts. Second one's pretty much a doozy. We really get into the minutia of things. But yeah, get started, right? Of course, download your templates. And of course, feel free to get started in Revit, right? I would start with either the site plan and the floor plan in general, right? You could probably even get started to the point that we are today. So, any questions right off the bat that came up and about that I can answer? Probably don't even know what to ask yet, right? But this is our start. So we'll leave it there for today.